presentation that Tracy Klein will present, which I'm excited to see. And I will introduce just briefly that Puget Sound Beekeepers Association is a 501(c) nonprofit organization, and everything that we do is driven by volunteers. And traditionally, we do vote for our volunteer board of directors and trustee positions at the end of the year, and I'm sure we will do that virtually this year. And so if there is someone who would like to get involved, just let me know. president@PugetSoundBees.org works well. And let's see what else. The Asian giant hornet is big in the news, and I'm fascinated by it. And hopefully everyone is sort of following along with that, especially if you're living up north. I met some beekeepers in Snohomish. One woman said she thought she saw one that day, and she didn't know anything about how to follow up or whether there should be traps set, and she has tons of bees, so I was really surprised. So just trying to get the word out so everyone is inspired and aware that there's a wonderful time window right now when we can kind of catch them, nip them in the bud before they take hold, after which time it's really going to be challenging to do that. So there's Washington State Beekeepers Association, as you probably saw information in the blog that I sent, the president's message. So you can reach out to me about that too, because I'm super, it's fun news to follow. And with that, I think I will just simply turn it over and have Tracy take it from here. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Well, hi everybody. I hope your bees are still alive. Thought that we would talk about how to keep them alive and talk about raising healthy winter bees. So I mentioned earlier that knotweed is blooming at my house, and this is a picture of a bee on a blossom of knotweed last year. They love the stuff. And I think that the nectaries had dried up with all the hot water, but with the rain that we got, they're back out buzzing around and making more honey. So if you have knotweed near you, but not on your lot, be thankful because your bees are out getting honey. Otherwise, I think Kit might be right that they're a little hungry right now. So what is a winter bee and why are they important? So as everyone knows, the bees don't go out and forage during the winter time. So oftentimes people wonder, well, how the heck are the summer bees only lasting for a month or so, but the winter bees will last 6 months or more? And scientifically, it's pretty cool. If you look at the picture there on the right-hand side, that's a summer bee on the left-hand side and a winter bee on the right-hand side. And you can see that the winter bee has a lot of fat bodies. And those fat bodies are important for producing vitellogenin, which is important to increase not only their lifespan, but to create brood food in the spring. Normally, bees can only create brood food for a couple of weeks, and then they go on to do other jobs, and those glands atrophy, but not so in the winter bees. They can go ahead and cluster up all winter long, and then be able to feed the new brood in the spring. So what gets in the way of that? And this is a great chart from Randy Oliver's scientific beekeeping site that shows, right now the honeybee population is going down, but the varroa population is going up. And he's got a lot of great work on his website that talks about why right now is a super important inflection point in your colonies, because as the bee population goes down and the varroa population goes up, so does the problems that the mites bring along with them, and that's mostly paralytic viruses. And that is what kills the bees in the fall. So many times people have said, oh, my bees swarmed away. Well, in the fall, they don't swarm away. They go away 1 bee or 2 bees at a time, and they die and they don't come back. So your colony will disappear if they have a super high mite count. In fact, not even a super high mite count, anything over 2%. But the really important thing about managing your bees right now is that if your bees die from what's called a varroa bomb, they oftentimes infect your neighbor's bees too, and so on and so forth. The other thing that's so important right now is nutrition. And Kit, what's missing in this picture? Kit might be on mute. Anybody want to unmute and let me know what's wrong with this picture? What's missing?
Pollen.
Exactly. There's pollen missing. So there's this nice honey arch and there's capped brood below it in the center, and then off to the right-hand side in the bottom corner, you can see, if you look really closely, some uncapped brood, but there's no pollen. And so the bees, what they'll do at this time of year, or anytime when there's no pollen, is they'll actually cannibalize some of the uncapped brood to feed the other brood. And so you get this spotty pattern. And right now it's super important to look at this interface to see, is there any pollen? Because oftentimes people will say, oh, that's weird, my bees took a brood break in August. And this is why, because there's usually, when everything's hot and dry, pollen's hard to come by. And the bees will use up or just be on the razor's edge of having enough. And they, if they don't have enough pollen, they can't raise healthy winter bees. So common mite-vectored viruses, the most common is this deformed wing virus. If you look really closely on the left wing of that poor bee with deformed wing, she's also got a mite stuck to her. And this bee really doesn't stand a chance. She'll die, and they're also underweight when they're infected with mites. So even if a bee is infected during its pupation, then what happens is that the mite feeds off of the fat bodies on the bee, and the bee is underweight and never does perform as well as a bee that was not infected during its development. The picture on the right-hand side is a picture of a couple of things. I've got two bees with K-wing circled, but there's also a bee next to the queen. If you can find the queen, bonus points. There's a bee that also has a deformed wing virus. And this is from the Bee-Informed partnership, beinformed.org. They have a really neat website too that talks about different brood diseases. I highly recommend going there and checking that out. They also have a citizen participation survey every year. And if you think that we don't have very many mites in this area, this picture is to show how wrong you might be. This was from September 26, 2017, but every year this map is pretty much the same. Notice that red zone there. That's where we have, that's where we live, obviously, and that's a huge number of people reporting that they have a higher than healthy mite levels. So as you're measuring your mite levels, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, it's not a bad idea to go on the Bee-Informed partnership and join the survey. And I know that Danny also has a survey with Green River College. He's been monitoring mite levels for several years now, and I noticed on one of the, I think it was Western Washington Beekeepers, he's been asking people to volunteer and add to their study as well. So if you like that kind of thing, there's two places that you can really help out. All right, so this is my favorite way to check mites, is to do an alcohol wash. It's simple, it's fast. All you need is a bucket, a half-cup scoop, and one of those easy check devices there. And so if you look on the picture on the right-hand side, this sample of bees, a half a cup is roughly 300 bees. So if you're really into it, you can count the bees, or you can just say, well, that's about 300 bees. So if you look at that dish there, and most of those little round things in the bottom of that cup are mites. There are a few bee legs in there and other flotsam and jetsam, but it's almost all mites. Anybody wager a guess what the mite load is in this colony of, in this sample of 251 bees? On a percentage basis? Go ahead and unmute your phone and take a guess.
Looks like 10 to 15%.
10 or 15%?
I was going to say 20.
10 or 15% is really close. 12% infestation. So should we treat this colony?
Yes.
Yes, for sure. Good job, you guys. All right, so a not as reliable way, but better than nothing. If you're super against killing 300 bees to save 50,000, then there is another way that you could, a couple different ways, but one easy way is to count the 24-hour mite drop. And it's not as dependable, but better than nothing. So in the little writing there, it says that if your colony has 8 or more frames of bees and a 24-hour mite drop is 40 or more, then you need to treat. If it's less than 8 frames of bees and there's 20 mites over a 24-hour period, you also need to treat. And I have one colony in my apiary who has a terrible mite count. There were 20 mites in the alcohol wash 3 weeks ago that I did. All of my other colonies were 5 or below. This one happens to be 20, so not a very rural, hygienic queen. In fact, she was from a swarm colony.
What is clear?
And so look what happens. I treated with oxalic acid the other day because it happened to be a broodless colony. I made them so because I got rid of that queen. And this was the second day of mites, so I took the sticky board out and it had about that many mites on it. And then this was the mite this morning, so this actually was day 2. And if you imagine, I know it's a little hard to see, but most of the little dots on there are dead mites.
Sure that providers at these religious health systems can offer life-saving miscarriage care for patients who come in.
Yeah, so if you guys could mute your phones, that'd be awesome. Or Jeff, could you mute everybody but me?
I'm working on it.
Awesome. All right, so popular treatment options. Is hope and crossing your fingers a good treatment option? No. But yet that's what a lot of people do, is they hope and they think, well, I didn't see any mites in my inspection, so therefore I must not have any. And last year there was some really cool research that was published on mites, and it actually showed that mites usually hang out on the underside of the bee. So almost never do you see them on top of the bee, which explains why people almost never see mites. So if you see mites during your inspection on top of the bees, you got to do something, and you got to do something now, because those bees are super infected. All right, infested rather. All right, so we know hope's not a good option. Mite-Away Quick Strips and Formic Pro are a good option. That's the Blue Sky Beekeeping Supply website has a really good information sheet on how to use Mite-Away Quick Strips. Another good option this time of year after you pull your supers is Apigard. You can't use Apigard while your supers are on because it makes your honey taste like Listerine. It makes everything in the colony smell like Listerine too. It doesn't poison the honey, but Listerine's yucky. All right, and then the other really popular method is oxalic acid, either in a dribble, using a vaporization method, or shop towels. All 3 of these methods do require that people read the instructions. I personally am not an instruction reader. However, I read the instructions on using these, and it's super important that you do, because there's some important PPE needs for each of them, and to keep you healthy and to keep your bees healthy. So whichever you choose, if your mite count is above 2%, pick one and go with it. All right, and then switching topics a little bit, should I feed my bees 2-to-1 syrup right now? Maybe, maybe not. So yes, if you've already removed your supers and there's less than 70 pounds of honey. So each deep frame, if it was fully capped on both sides, has roughly 10 pounds of honey on it, and a medium frame has roughly 4 pounds. So a good way to figure out whether your colony needs honey or not is to just grab the back of your colony and lift up and see if you can lift it. And if it lifts up easily, there's definitely not 70 pounds of honey in there. But if it's pretty heavy, then there probably are. Now that's, so if you run deeps, that's 7 frames that you need to have of honey. Now some are going to have arches, some of them are going to be full on one side, some of them are going to be full on both sides. Just kind of estimate, and also know that during this dearth that they'll be eating through some of that honey. So you want to make sure that really that you want to have 70 pounds of honey on there in late October. So plan ahead for that, and feeding is better than not feeding. And then, so if your honey supers are still on, no, you don't want to feed them. And if your bees have enough honey stored, they're good. If the average temps this fall get down below 55 degrees, it doesn't make any sense to add the syrup because they won't eat it anyway. It's too cold. And then one final note on the age-old discussion on 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. Do you do that by weight or by volume? And the answer is yes. So if you happen to mix by weight, it'll make a little bit thicker syrup. If you mix by volume, it'll make a little thinner syrup, but it's close enough. The bees, just like us, compensate, and if there's more sugar in it and they, per volume, and they need less, they just eat less of it. So I was taught in my master's class by the PhD that wrote the chapter on nutrition in the hive and the honeybee, and what he said was, they created these ratios about 100 years ago, and he goes, I kind of think that what they really meant was 1 bucket of sugar and 1 bucket of water, 1 to 1, and 2 buckets of sugar and 1 bucket of water, whatever's easiest for you. So if you want to get in the raging debate online, go for it, but they're your bees, and it honestly really doesn't matter. All right, and then a couple of solutions for common bee enemies. Wasps are a huge bee enemy right now. I had a colony a few years ago get completely wiped out in 2 hours flat, 2 hours. They figured out how to get past my robbing screen, and that was that. And so if you don't have robbing screens on right now and you see wasps by the front of your colonies, either make them and order them. I know that the bee supply places are really behind right now, so they're easy to make if you have anybody handy. The trick is you need to have a gate in the front that's closed, because the wasps can only go forward and backwards. They're not smart enough to land on the edge of the box and go down behind and get in. But the bees are, they'll figure it out. Plus they have the upper entrance. Hopefully you have upper entrances too. You want to have an upper entrance to improve the airflow. It dries out the honey faster, and it gives them ingress and egress to the honey supers so that they can bypass going through the brood chamber to get up there. All right, and then finally, I was asked this earlier today, so I threw this slide in. So what do I do with my supers when I remove them? So you want to extract, obviously, the capped honey. What if I have honey frames that are not capped? You obviously don't want to extract those if they're wet. So you can either store them in a container that seals, although if you do that, I recommend that you freeze it first, because the wax moths have just been horrible this year. Otherwise the wax moths will get in there. And then if you try and extract it and it's too wet, what'll happen is it'll ferment the rest of your honey, and then you can make mead with it. Or you can just leave it right on top of your colony and leave that for the bees. If you're going to store your supers somewhere that's dark, consider using paramoth crystals, or freeze your frames before you put them in an airtight container. I've used heavy-duty leaf bags for mine consistently after I freeze them, and not had a problem. I did start freezing my frames after I got wax moths in them one winter. One note on mothballs: never, 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 never use mothballs. Use this product called Paramoth. Mothballs are toxic to bees, and it'll kill your bees for years to come if you use it. So if you happen to accidentally use mothballs, you actually have to throw those frames and the wax away, or make candles out of the wax later, although they'll smell like mothballs. And then just a note on the PSBA extractor rentals. Those are available. See the website or ask Kit for more information. And what most people do for storage of the supers is they'll extract the honey, and then they'll put it back onto a colony. You don't have to put it on the same colony, but you could put it on one of your weaker colonies that's light, and then they'll lick all the honey out and store it down below. And then you can take the supers off a few days later and they'll be nice and dry. So you don't bring any ants or other critters into your garage or wherever else you're storing your supers. When you put them on top like that, some people will put them off to the side and just let the bees rub it out. But if you've got yellow jackets in the area, the yellow jackets will get in those too. And then it also could induce a big robbing frenzy on any of your weaker colonies. And you obviously don't want that. And now I think that's it. We blew through those so that we can have lots of time for questions.
Yeah. So Tracy, there's been a few questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to go back to your slide deck, but someone asked
Sure.
if you could point out the queen in that early photo.
Oh, sure. Okay, can anybody else point out the queen?
I think the screen is frozen, or mine is.
Yeah, it's sort of on a transition.
Can you see it now, Jeff?
No, I'm on the can you feed your bees the 2-to-1 SERP now slide.
That looks like somebody smashed it and it's a glass.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, why that's stuck. Maybe try unsharing your deck and sharing it again. Technology.
Right. How about now?
Yes, we can see it now.
Is it that one on the top center there with
You
the
see my
big long
cursor?
wings? Yeah, with the big long wings. Is that?
This one right here? Yep. This bee right here is the one with deformed wing virus.
Tracy, would you describe K-wing?
Sure. So K-wing is literally K-wing. So if you look at this bee right here, see how her wings stick out? And see how this bee over here, her wings fold up nicely? Oftentimes these bees with K-wing, you'll see walking around on the ground outside.
So maybe it would help think about it. When you look at bees, you usually only think of them having you only see really the 2 wings because the other 2 wings are folded underneath. When they have K-wing, the wings don't stay together. So it kind of makes a K shape. I don't know if that's the best photo.
Yeah, this isn't the greatest.
Yeah, it looks like a K when you see it because the 2 wings aren't hooked together like you normally would see them.
Do they come right out of the cell looking that way? Or does it develop with their life?
I've never seen any come out like that. Only in the older bees have I seen that.
Thank you.
And notice in this picture how the brood is all spotty.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, look at all the melted brood in there. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is caused by the Varroa, the viruses. And so they're pulling out the infected ones and the queen's laying. And this one here looks really bad. This colony might have some other things going on too.
Yeah, Tracy, it looks like you get the white spots at the top of the cells. See on that lower right-hand side? Is that also an indication of Varroa?
No, this is just a camera reflecting off of some small brood. Although if you tilt a colony on this, so that you can see up on the sides, there'll be guano on the sides, little white spots, and that might poop on a seriously infected colony. You can see that too. But anytime you see one bee with deformed wing virus like this one, that's your cue to do something quickly. And usually, I mean, it's kind of rough to do that this time of year. Whenever I find a colony that has deformed wing virus, I'll requeen that.
Tracy, why? You think the queen is carrying a genetic predisposition to, like?
Yeah, I know that queen doesn't have the right genetics, and her bees are not Varroa hygienic.
Okay.
And so I'll requeen so I get better genetics.
Something you learn as you keep bees longer, you don't get attached to your queens anymore. They will they'll take the colony down. It's just one piece of an organism. The queens can also get sick too, so every egg they lay could be diseased. If there's in a colony like this, I would expect that queen to be diseased as well.
Tracy,
the next question in chat was how do you sample for varroa mites? You showed a picture of the tools you use, but maybe walk through those steps a little bit. Sorry, I cut someone off.
That's okay. So the most likely bees to have varroa mites are the nurse bees that are tending to the brood that's just about ready to be capped. So if you think about it, the foundress mite jumps in a cell right before it gets capped so that she can start laying eggs in there. So it's best to find a frame of open brood that's just being capped. And double and triple check to make sure your queen is not on it. And then what I do is I take the frame and I smack it down in the bucket. And I go ahead and take my time and put the frame back in the colony, and there'll be flying bees. And you don't really want those anyway, because those bees are the foragers. It'll be the nurse bees that are crawling around in the bottom of the bucket. Then I just take the bucket and shake it a little bit, and I scoop the half-cup measuring cup in there, and then I dump it in the Easy Check bottle, screw the lid on, and shake it up. And if you use, I know alcohol is hard to find right now, so you can use rubbing alcohol if you can find it, or use vodka, or Everclear is even better because Everclear has a really high alcohol concentration. Because the 50% isopropyl alcohol won't get as many mites off as the 70% isopropyl alcohol. So the higher alcohol content does give you a better sampling, and you shake that for 20 or 30 seconds. And then you just let all the mites settle to the bottom, because there's like a holy basket inside that holds the bees up, but the mites fall through. And then you just count. And if there's a ton of them in this one, I just use a really fine kitchen sieve and sieve the mites out and reuse the alcohol. You can reuse the alcohol over and over and over. It's a little dark after a little while, but you can just keep right on using it.
Could you comment on using the powdered sugar?
Sure, you have to shake for a long time, and it's not as accurate, so I don't do it anymore.
How far off is it?
It's about, I've heard it's about 60%, so 60 to 70%. So if you just multiply it by a factor of 1.3, you're probably pretty close. But you have to you have to shake it for a whole minute.
Right.
And we did that test in field day too. We did powdered sugar first, and then of those cleaned bees, we then alcoholed them to see how many more mites we could get off of them. And it was about, the sugar shake was getting about 60% of the mites, but yeah, it's not, it's something. It's, you know, it's better than nothing. So do something.
Right.
Does
Remember,
does it seem to
hope-
be consistently low? So you might use just that as a, you know, you use a different factor if you're looking
Yeah.
for.
you can if you want.
Mhm.
Yeah, powdered sugar gets sticky. So that's what tends to keep it from being real effective at getting lodged under the mites. So if you do 1 tablespoon, shake them, dump that out, add a fresh tablespoon, shake them more, dump that out, and maybe even do a 3rd tablespoon, you'll get increasingly more mites every time you do that.
I see.
But yeah, if you just put a bunch of sugar in there and shake it out in the sun, they'll all start puking, and it's just going to be a sticky mess, and you're not going to get a good mite count off of that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the alcohol wash, yes, you're killing 200 to 300 bees, but you're saving 50,000. And this is a critical time of the year to make sure that you're getting an accurate count, because otherwise you'll end up spending, you know, $250 again next spring, when you could have sacrificed 300 bees and still had your colony in the spring.
Are you likely to treat with some treatment where there's oxalic acid or something else anyway? Are you likely to find some hive among your group that has got a higher infection, so therefore you kind of have to treat to whatever the highest level is, and you treat them all?
I don't, I'm a microbiologist, so I don't treat unless it's necessary.
I see.
Yeah, and you also, if you don't know, then you don't know which your hives are your good queens. You know,
Right.
So you got to get your metrics so you know which ones you want to breed from the following year. The next question here was, how do you feed them? Do you put the bucket next to the hive?
No. So right now, especially, I'm glad you asked that. It's especially important not to open feed right now, especially for those of us that live in town. The likelihood of there being beekeepers within a 2-mile radius of you is pretty close to 100%. And those bees, you're just going to end up feeding your neighbor's bees and potentially creating a robbing storm in your own apiary. So I don't open feed. And right now I don't even put any feeding stimulants in, because that just creates a robbing frenzy too. So I use 2-to-1 sugar, and then I add a little bit of lemon juice and a little bit of white vinegar to help invert the sugar, like a tablespoon of each per gallon. And I use top feeders. I don't use the Boardman front feeders ever. If that's all you have, then I would recommend putting that on top of your inner cover and put an extra empty super box over the top so that it becomes a top feeder and only those bees can get at it.
A tip I might add to that too is, if you are concerned about a hive not being strong enough to defend itself, feed your strong colonies and then steal the capped honey from them and give that to your little nukes that you're taking through winter.
Yeah, that's a good trick too.
The next question is about combining colonies and what's too small or weak to try to overwinter.
That's a great question. And I recommend for intermediate and beginner beekeepers to not try to overwinter anything less than 8 or 10 frames. So you could try to overwinter in 1 deep. Most people overwinter 2 deeps or 3 mediums. And so the more bees you have going into the winter, the bigger the cluster, the more likely they're going to be able to maintain the warmth and enough population to come out in the spring with bees. Now, you may have to feed them in the spring before you'd have to feed a smaller colony, but generally saying, beekeepers with experience recommend that you take your losses in the fall, so that it's better to take 1 strong colony into the winter and through it and split in the spring, as opposed to taking 2 small colonies into the winter and having them both die and having to buy bees.
Tracy,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I don't have a chat.
Oh,
I
I
don't
bunch
have
of
a
people
chat.
talking.
I don't have a chat potential, so I have a question, and it's a little slightly off topic, but I have this situation where I got some. I have a deep that I have some plastic and some wood frames in them, and I swear they will not draw out a couple of the plastic frames, and I painted them twice with, well, your wax. They refuse to cross. I mean, they absolutely, positively refuse. And at one point, they were just doing random, crazy, drawing out big stuff that looked like kindergartners trying to draw or something. I mean, I don't understand. And they'll cross over it and go over to the next frame and do other things.
You know what they're trying to tell you, Eileen?
What?
Throw those away and get new ones.
I just bought some, and they just arrived today, and I'm gonna put them in. I can't believe it. Like, what's wrong with those frames?
They don't like them. I hate plastic frames too myself.
I do too. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Tracy.
I have a question.
Sure.
We are new, and we have a colony that has 2 deeps on it, and it's doing quite well. And then we have another colony that the nuke just never did anything. The colony is just not, there's just hardly any bees, and there's not really any new brood. There was some drone brood. It's just not going to make it. And so what do we do? How do we even, like you say, you don't really want to try to get them through the winter. What do we do about that?
Well, if you combine them with your other colony, what you risk is giving whatever flaws that colony has to your other colony. So at this point, I would recommend just let them die.
Okay.
If your strong colony is doing great, I wouldn't risk it by adding those other bees, because sounds like there's something wrong. And without looking at it, I don't know if it's just you have a crappy queen or if there's something wrong. And so the easiest thing to do is to just go ahead and let them die and start over. And if you got that as a nuke, I would go ahead and throw all those frames away too, because people give you their old wax in the nukes. And so it could be there's something wrong with that wax because it's super old and it might have a whole bunch of miticides in it and pesticides, and it'd be best to just let the bees die, throw that away and start over.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Jeff, what would you do?
And that scenario, I would do the same thing. I don't even like to share tools between hives. So, yeah, I'm always worried about contaminating another hive unintentionally.
So Jeff, you mentioned earlier that you would feed a strong colony and take the frames that they store and move
make
them
your strong
to
colony do the work of making more frames of honey or sugar syrup honey, and then give that to your nukes.
Why wouldn't you expect your small colony to store it up too? I mean, they're good at it.
They can, but they're not going to be as good, and they could be weak and get robbed in the process of you feeding them, because they won't be able to defend themselves like a strong colony will. And your strong colony will probably be the one doing it. So
yeah, so it'll end up in there anyway.
Take care of the problem ahead of time. Bees they'll rob capped honey, but they're a lot less likely to rob capped honey than open nectar or sugar water even.
And they'll do it faster too. They'll put that up in no time.
There was another question. There's actually several questions. For new first-year colonies, I'm not extracting any honey. Do I leave all the honey supers on over winter?
Okay, so I guess I have a return question. If they have more than 70 pounds of honey, why would you not extract honey?
This was Melissa. I don't know if you can.
Melissa.
Yeah, so I'll have to see if I've got to do the test to see if they've got 70 pounds. So that's the magic answer. If they have 70 pounds, then I can go ahead and take it.
Sure can.
Otherwise, okay. But if they don't have 70 pounds and they've got honey in the supers, should I leave those honey supers on so they've got
Yeah,
a total of
I
70?
would. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and don't forget Jeff and I will let you in our little secret that Jeff let out last month. There's actually 3 honey flows in Seattle. There's blackberries, there's knotweed, and Jeff, what's the third one?
Everyone else's hives dying.
Yep.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I thought you were going to say ivy.
No, ivy's awful. You don't want ivy honey. In fact, I feed during the ivy flow just so they don't go get that. But literally, some of my colonies will gain 70 pounds just in September and October alone. And where do they get that?
But that's not in the city, right? So I'm in the city.
That's
Sure,
the
but
city.
it's there too. It's especially
Definitely
there.
the city.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely the city.
Tracy,
So
I
many,
live in
there's so
Seattle
many hives that
address. I
die
live
in the
in
city. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I live in South Seattle and my bees stock up, and it can only be coming from other people's colonies.
Tracy, what's wrong with ivy?
So the ivy honey is stark white. Who cares? It crystallizes almost immediately when the bees put it up, and it smells like cat pee. No joke. So, but the problem is because it crystallizes right away, the bees can't eat it over the winter. So they will starve if they only have white ivy honey in there. So you can leave it in there, and then in the spring when they can get out to get water, they'll use it. But if they've got the cluster and ivy honey right next to them, they'll die.
Can I tell you my robbing story?
Go for it, Jeslyn.
I'm in the backyard of Ron Sims. I have 4 hives. Shelley has 2 and Ron has 1. We were totally robbed of practically all the honey. I had a full box. Box number 4 was packed with honey. I put box 5 on while I waited the time to harvest. And I opened up box 4. Every single cell was empty. No.
How do you know
honey.
they were robbed and that they didn't eat it because they were hungry?
Well, I had more honey down below. I had 3 boxes. Box 2 had honey, and brood. Box 3 had honey.
So
4 was totally packed.
if they got robbed, it would probably all be gone.
Yeah,
What they may, but you had honey down below too. So but that would have been gone too. What may have happened is that they'll move honey. And so they may have eaten it or they may have moved it down below.
Well, the other 2 people didn't have any honey at all. I had honey here and there and was able to harvest some.
Bummer.
Did you have an upper entrance?
Did I what?
Did you have an upper entrance?
I did. Had entrance reducers on the bottom, but there was an upper entrance to the honey box. Yeah.
Possible.
That's sad.
Yeah, I have seen really robust queens. I've seen them open up a clogged brood nest for a queen they really liked before. So capped honey is not, it's not cement. They'll uncap it and move that whole area if they need to. It's a lot of work, but they'll do it if they need to make room for something.
Yeah.
But yeah, an upper entrance, maybe there could have been some robbing and they couldn't defend the whole thing, so they defended what they could. I don't know. I think, yeah, I agree with Tracy though. It seems like if they're going to get robbed, the whole hive would get robbed out. Like they would kill the hive in the process.
Oh, no, the queen is still there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've gotten a couple of questions this last month. Is this robbing or orientation flights? And orientation flights, there's a lot of bees in the afternoon. They come out, they run up the box, they fly a little bit, they're everywhere in the front, but it's kind of lazy. When it's robbing, it's a frenzy. And there's bees everywhere, and they're fighting at the entrance, and there's quite a bit of difference in what that looks like.
Now, see, it's not my backyard. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what happened with my bees that got eaten by the yellow jackets there in an outyard.
It also sounds really different.
Yeah, it does. It doesn't sound angry when they're just doing orientation flights.
And you can hear it, like you can be in the next space and then hear something and go, what the heck is going on? And
it's a fight.
Sadly.
Yeah, so if you have a really strong colony, make sure that you're testing for mites all the way through September, because they'll go rob out somebody's dying colony and bring back all those mites. So let's say you treated in August and you got your mite counts really low, don't count on that being it. You could have a mite bomb come back when they go rob somebody's dying colony.
Okay.
I've treated in October the last 2 years for the first time because it was just obvious that August didn't do enough. So maybe that's exactly what my bees did, is robbed others.
Yeah, honestly, I've started using Apigard in the fall just for that one reason, and it's pretty good for you treating against nosema too. So after I pull my supers, I usually put Apigard on everybody just to keep the mite counts low while they're doing the third honey flow.
Does that spearmint flavor go away by spring in case the new honey gets mixed with old honey?
Well, they'll eat through most of it, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't go all the way away by the spring, but once it starts warming up, then by the time I have nukes leaving, it's all gone. So it's all gone by the end of April or so. But definitely you can still smell it in February and March.
Okay, let's see. Other questions here. Could you go over storing and wax-proofing empty honey supers with a little bit more detail? Once you freeze the frame, did you say you seal in garbage bags? And problems with moisture, induced mold, or other potential problems after bagging and sealing?
Wow, that's a long question. So let me see if I can find it in the chat. So I pull the honey supers off, and then I leave them. I'm opening up the chat. So I pull them off of the beehive and they're dry. And then I freeze them, and then I let them warm up so they don't have moisture in them. And that's when I put them in a lawn and leaf bag, and tie a knot in it. And then I have a huge stack of them in my garage. And I used to store them wet until I got ants in my garage and decided that was a really bad idea. So I joined most beekeepers and store them dry now. You could also, if you have a dry outdoor shed that you can leave them in, the freezing in the wintertime will help keep the moths out too, right? Because it'll freeze the wax moth larva. Any problems with moisture? Yep, nope. Because they're all dry, then I've never had problems with moisture. Just ants.
All right, next question. Would it be safe to use Would it be safe to use comb from a Varroa infested hive later after you get rid of the Varroa?
Yes.
And then how do you know if the queen is diseased with Varroa related virus?
So you don't know that the queen is diseased per se, as you know that the bees are. So that K-wing, you see deformed wing for sure. If you see a bunch of hairless bees out front that are kind of twitchy and they're crawling around on the ground and they can't really get back up into the colony, that's a really good sign that you have one or multiple bee viruses going on. And they're almost all vectored by the mites. And every year I read articles about how they've discovered more bee viruses, so there's lots of them.
Next question, can you use the blue windshield wiper fluid instead, not the yellow one?
You can, it doesn't work very well, I've tried it.
Is it too foamy?
It wasn't the foam, it's that the the mites didn't come off. I know they said that you could, and I thought, woohoo, I've got a whole gallon of that. I'm going to try it, but I didn't have much luck with it. Other people have said they put a little bit of Dawn dishwashing soap in with it, but then you get bubbles, and easier just to use alcohol.
Okay, this is a long question. Another question, if I have only 1 or 2 hives with high mite count among 5 to 6 others, which are 1 to 2%, would you treat all the hives or only the ones with a high mite count?
So that depends on, it depends. The ones with 1 or 2% mites will probably be fine unless they go and rob out the ones next door, which is a high likelihood if they're dying. So it's easier just to, if you've only got a few colonies, just go ahead and treat them all at the same time.
Could you give a little more detail to the 70-pound guideline for honey stores needed to overwinter? Is the 70 pounds combined weight of the 2 deep supers, or is the weight of the frames which are being used generally for honey stores?
It's the honey weight, so it's the total combined honey weight. So if, like I mentioned earlier, if you've got, you'll have some frames that have a honey arch, some frames that have honey all down one side. You know, it's stored everywhere. So it's the combined weight. And I literally just walk behind my colony, put my hand underneath the back, and I grab and I pull up. And I'm pretty strong, but if you know, everybody I think has a pretty good idea of what a 50-pound kid weighs. So if you're like lifting up the back and you're thinking it's like a toddler size, then it's plenty.
Yeah.
And it does. And anyway, in the winter time, and we'll talk about this in January, I always check my colonies in January, and Rusty Burlew on her Honeybee Suite site has a couple of really good articles about this. She checks in the winter too, and it just takes a quick peek inside to see where your bees are. And if they're on the top, you need to feed them. So it's easy to add sugar and winter patties in January and February so they don't starve. And March is the worst. So just plan on needing to feed some sort of dry sugar supplements in the spring.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? Is it generally the case that the 70 pounds will require at least 1 medium honey super, or does it often, can you often find 70 pounds within the two deep brood supers?
Yeah, I never use mediums over the winter. So I always reduce down to 2 deeps, or if I've got a small colony, down to 1 deep. So those of you that are running supers that are running all mediums, it's you want to start with 3 mediums, and if you need to reduce down to 2 mediums, that's fine too.
I see.
Tracy, it sounds like maybe you always feed 2 to 1. You know,
in the fall, yeah.
But in the summer, so if we're in fall now. Did I say that out loud?
Yeah.
We're right on the verge. I fed my last 1-to-1. What I said was going to be my last 1-to-1 this weekend because it's going to be hot all week. But now is the time to switch over.
Yeah,
because it's all about timing, and there's dew in the morning at my house every day, so there's less sunlight, there's less time for the bees to bring food in, there's less time for them to dry it out, and so it's best to switch to the 2-to-1 because that way it has more sugar per volume. And while we're on the subject, making 2-to-1, you can't do it anymore at tap water temperature. You've got to heat the water. But if you scorch the sugar, that's poisonous to the bees. So it's always best to heat the water and add it to the sugar.
Mm. And just also on the 70-pound goal, so feeding them, being pretty proactive about feeding them now and going forward is the way to build that weight in the 2 double deeps.
Yeah, and next month we'll talk about how to rearrange your beehive so that the bees are all on the bottom and the honey's on the top.
Okay.
I do have a lot of success building honey in the fall without feeding until October. I mean, they really are bringing in, I don't know if they're robbing and that's all. It seems like there's.
Me.
Your bees would never do that, Kit. It's only my bees.
It's only the bees that come and do it to me. My bees aren't doing it anywhere. I've told them all to stay home.
I told all mine to go to Jesslyn's. Kidding, Jesslyn.
I wanted to share with you a feeding system I came up with. I had a box made that's only, I don't know, maybe 3 inches high or something. And it had an opening in the center. And I put sugar with just enough water in it to make a block. And then I put that over the top of the hive. So they have a way to get up there. So there was a little space in the middle where they could come and go. And it was screened on the bottom. It wasn't wood, it was screened. So they could be working at the sugar whenever they needed it.
What time
Yeah,
of year?
is that for the winter?
Uh-huh.
That's a fancy sugar camp.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the hardware store made me the box.
I want to speak to extractor rentals really quick while people are still around. The parking lot at the Arboretum is locked, closed, not able to access the apiary very well. So what we've been able to do is roll the extractor past the gate to put it in someone's car, but not the big extractors. We're limited in size. So we're making it work, and it's been sort of a one person at a time kind of conversation to make sure that everybody's on the same page. But that's been kind of a surprise to find everything locked up. Just so we're all aware. Thank you.
Surprises in 2020?
No.
So a few more questions here. Brandy asks, I have Apigard on back order. Is it sold anywhere locally? I don't know when I'll get it in.
I don't know. Brandy, how much do you need?
I don't know. I've got 2 hives. And by the way, my queenless hive has a queen and eggs and larvae, and it's doing great now. I know. Yeah, I don't know. I ordered it from Man Lake, and like I got everything but the Apigard. So I just got my the tester in the mail. So the next inspection, we're going to be testing for the mites.
Okay, so if it doesn't come by next week, send me a message on my Seattle Honeybees Facebook page.
Okay. And also, I've been feeding the pollen patties because I had to build that brood back up. Should I still be feeding pollen patties, or should I stop that now?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends. If you have natural pollen in there, then probably not.
So much
But if
pollen right now.
inside on the frames?
Well, I'll find out when I go in to do my inspection, but like they're flying in with the biggest saddlebags of orange pollen right now. It's crazy.
Awesome. Yeah, I would look at that interface and see if you have pollen inside your colony. If you do, then you don't have to feed pollen patties. And each colony will be a little bit different because the genetics, they have different pollen, capabilities in bringing it in. Some will bring in so much and others won't bring in any. So just look at each colony and make your choices then.
Okay.
Yeah, that orange, the asters have started blooming in the sunflowers, so
okay.
Those are good sources for pollen this time of year.
I was wondering what that was.
Yeah, if it's
very
nice,
bright orange.
Yeah, those are something in the aster family. Could be goldenrod. Could be
I thought
sunflowers.
it was my zucchini.
Next question here was, if you're treating for mites with OA right after removing honey sippers, should you use a 3-cycle application once every 6 or 7 days to cover a full range of brood emerging?
So I'm not a fan of that. I know lots of people do, but I don't do it. I only use oxalic acid if they're broodless. I personally don't think that that's very effective. Having read Randy Oliver's research on weekly oxalic acid vaporization. And each time you do it, you've got to suit up, put your respirator on, put your goggles on, your glasses on, and go through all that hassle, lug the battery out there. It's pain. So I don't do that. I'll only use oxalic acid during a broodless period. Once. You saw all those mites on that sticky board. That's from one oxalic acid dribble after they were broodless. So that was 2 days after.
On that topic of when they're broodless, what are your thoughts about sequestering the queen to create that broodless moment?
Yeah, so Randy's got a great calendar on his website on how to do that and how to count. Basically, you sequester the queen for 2 weeks. And then you've got a 3-day window after you let her out to have a broodless period.
And why would you want broodless?
Because oxalic acid doesn't kill the mites underneath the capping.
Oh,
Only Formic Pro or Mite-Away Quick Strips will do that.
WSU's done some good research on this too. If anyone can look up one of their, I don't think we have any of those recorded, but yeah, they show that a broodless period was about 40% effective on the mites, and a treatment was about 40% effective on the mites. But if you combine them together, you get about 98% mite kill. So they really encourage everyone to combine the two together to get a good mite kill, because you're not really getting a good kill any other way.
and tell me again the number of days that the queen is sequestered?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And then you've got to wait for you've got to wait another week, because then the eggs that she laid right before you sequestered her will still be capped, because they take 21 days to hatch. So you've got day 21, 22, and 23 basically to get her done.
And do we have enough time in the period leading up to when winter bees eggs are being laid to do that now?
No.
I see. So it has to be started earlier.
Right. So, I mean, right now, your two best options are Mite-Away Quick Strips / Formic Pro or Apigard. And with the Mite-Away Quick Strips, you need to make sure and read the instructions, right, Eileen? And you need to make sure that you watch the weather forecast, because it's really detrimental to the bees if you use it when it's too hot.
Formic Pro, read those instructions too. They're really different than Mite-Away Quick Strips.
Yeah. And the link is on that page, and I'll make sure Jeff has a PDF of the slides so that they can post it. So but you can just Google it too, instructions for Formic Pro, and it comes right up on the Blue Sky Bee Supply.
And Jeff, could you say what was that reference that you had on the combination of broodless?
I don't have this slide deck from WSU, but in my mental notes is your brood breaks are around 40-some% effective, and your treatments are around 50% effective. But WSU is not testing with Formic, so their treatments don't penetrate the cell cappings. Formic's a different sort of beast there in that sense, because it can penetrate. But so they're using the treatments that they're doing with a brood break to get up to 98, 99% effectivity or mite kill in the hive.
Right. And the other thing with Formic Pro and Mite-Away Quick Strips is you can't feed your colonies while you're using that. And it doesn't explain why in the label. So one of my fellow students called the manufacturer during my bee class and asked, and they said it's because there was a higher bee mortality, colony mortality, over the winter when they treated and fed at the same time, but it was a trend. It wasn't statistically significant. They didn't put it in their label, but that's why they don't recommend it.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I remember something Randy Oliver said was with oxalic acid, it's actually the opposite if you're doing a dribble. You want them well fed so they don't absorb as much of that.
Right. Or use glycerin instead of syrup.
Yeah. Don't mix up your treatments.
Yeah.
There was one other question here. Actually, it looks like there's a new one down here too. I've been feeding 1-to-1 syrup. They're consuming around 1 quart per day. What is the normal amount?
It depends on how many bees there are and how hungry they are. I've got nucleus colonies that'll go through a gallon in 3 or 4 days. So it just really, it's really variable.
But sometimes they get neurotic and they store that syrup in the brood chamber too. So you kind of have to watch and make sure that they're not going crazy.
Yeah.
They say, you know, they won't take it unless they need it, but I can argue otherwise. They'll take it. They'll take it. They'll take
Well,
it.
some of them will take.
And how do you monitor that? I mean, do you have to look all the time to see if they're filling the brood areas?
Well, you know, before you feed them again, see what it looks like in there. If there's oodles of feed, then make sure the queen has room to do her job.
Yeah, and you don't have to look far. If, you know, this time of year, if the 2 outside frames are totally bone dry, then feed. Because there's hardly any in the middle either. So you want them storing sugar, water, or nectar on those outside frames. And if there isn't any, keep feeding.
Is that true? Is that true for the 2-to-1 feed as well? Will they tend to store that in the backfill the brood area as well with 2-to-1?
Well, they should be backfilling the brood area starting in a little bit anyway. The top boxes anyway, you want them to backfill that with honey and force the queen to start laying lower and lower and lower in the box. That way they've got that honey to move up, because bees in the winter won't move down for honey, but they will move up.
So the issue of backfilling is more a problem with the 1-to-1 than it is with the 2-to-1?
No, either one.
I see.
I think you're maybe confusing the moisture content. The reason for feeding a stronger syrup solution late summer is it encourages them to brood up less and more for storing the sugar, and there's less water for them to evaporate off. Where in spring, when you're doing 1-to-1, that's closer to nectar, so they're more likely to use that to make more brood because they feel like there's a nectar flow going on, and wax, yeah. But yeah, if they need brood, they'll add water, they'll do whatever they need to do to make it all work. But just think about moisture, and you don't want to go into winter with a lot of moisture in your hive.
So, Tracy, I have a rectangular plastic top feeder that I put on, you know, the one that sits on top. Yeah. And I am beset by ants, and I've tried everything. I put duct tape around, you know, the outside. I've tried like painter's tape, then I went to duct tape, and it's just like, it's horrible. These little awful, I guess
sugar ants.
Sugar
they
ants.
love it.
So
yeah.
I've always gotten rid of them with cinnamon.
Okay, where do
you have to reapply it every time it rains, but spread cinnamon around your hive.
Okay.
Not in your hive. You don't want cinnamon honey, but just around the hive.
Okay.
And then find their trails and spray those down with vinegar so that they lose their scent trails to the hive.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
If cinnamon's not working, you can use mint oil or orange oil or something like that. They don't like that either.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. And Cost Plus has both sugar and big giant things of cinnamon.
I go to Costco.
Cost Plus sugar is cheaper if you have one near you.
I don't.
Yeah, I got some sugar at Costco today. It's $14.59, I think, for 25 pounds.
Yeah, Cost Plus has the 50-pound sacks for $24.
Nice.
So it's about the same price.
Well, you save about $6.
Oh, 14. Yes, you do.
Yeah. A last question I see in chat here is, what about Hop Guard?
It's not all that effective, so I've never used it. You can use it if you want. So I think it's what, like 60% effective, Jeff?
I don't know. It's not as strong as some of the other things, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect it to be super effective.
And I don't use any of the chemical miticides. I only use the natural miticides. I haven't had to go to the chemical ones like Apivar and things like that. Those do accumulate in your wax and will ever more keep increasing in concentration. So I try to stay away from those.
Oh, we just got another question. Winco and Ever or Kent has sugar for 46 to 48 cents a pound at 10 pounds, 25 pounds, or 50-pound bags. Now that requires math in my head.
I think the number you were quoting at was 60 cents a pound.
Yeah. So let's see. That's a 50-pound bag at 0.46 would be about 23. All right, $23 for 50 pounds.
Yeah, it's a really good deal down there.
Yeah, that is a good deal.
Wow, it's almost worth the gas to drive down there for that.
They always look at me like I'm nuts when I pull up and I load 10, 50-pound sacks onto a flat part.
Did you get your fake yellow teeth out when you do that, right?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Comments? Anything people want to brag about?
I don't know.
Everybody get lots of honey this year?
Some of the hives.
Yeah. I kind of missed honey somehow this year. It didn't really, got a little bit, but it was an odd year, light year for honey.
We never get a whole lot in Queen Anne, but sometimes we get a good, for the blackberry, but this year we got a really good linden tree harvest, which comes right after the blackberries.
So those combined were probably terrific. Well, you don't get a lot
We
of
don't
blackberries.
get blackberries. Yeah, I mean, they kill them all, so. We have
Stace-
locust, which is a nice, all the hives here really do well the locust, and then they start eating that because there's not a lot of blackberry that comes right after that. And then the linden comes, and they usually do pretty good on that.
So at this point, you're feeding your bees because you've pulled the linden honey?
I haven't pulled any honey yet. I leave most of their honey for them, and I pull later in winter if they have it's top bar, so I can just pull one frame out at a time. I have that luxury.
Not yet.
Brian wants to know if we're interested in his latest episode of Beginner's Steep Learning Curve Blunders.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So at the last meeting, among other things, people were talking about feeding the bees with pollen patties in addition to sugar. And I said to myself, hey, I've got pollen patties in the cabinet. I'll just go pop out there right now and put some in the hive. Before anyone wants to interrupt, just start counting the number of stupid things I did in one trip. So it's a Tuesday night, and I thought it would just take a couple minutes, so I didn't get my veil on or gloves or start a smoker. And if anyone remembers from last month's meeting, I had been fighting a huge yellow jacket problem, and when I'd opened the hive the Saturday before, the bees were just furiously pissed off about everything. So I took the lid off the hive and popped the inner cover. And there were a whole bunch of bees right up under me in the cover. So I thought I wanted to make a little space to put this pollen patty out without crushing too many bees. So I grabbed a bee brush and shoved about 100 or 200 bees out of the way to slap that down. And by the time I had the lid back on, I was stung 7 times. Anything in the story make people think that I should do something different next time?
It's time-consuming, Vale.
So simple.
Stacy, did you get 30 pounds of honey or 30 frames of honey? She's still here? 30 pounds. Awesome.
I have a question that related to an earlier point you were making about the queens and the ones that you found that were really good at passing on mite-resistant genetics. If you have queens that are not sort of from a specially raised mite-resistant line, are you looking for those queens now, or is this just something to be aware of, and you go into winter with what you've got? You basically try to build up strong populations and just do the treatments and see what happens.
Yeah, that's what I would do at this point, is go with what I've got, because queens are in short supply right now, and you'd have to, I don't know anybody that has any more local queens for sale. Lori Miller might down in Roy. But I know that a couple weeks ago she was grafting her last batch, and the drones are getting kicked out and are getting lower and lower in population. So I would probably go with what I have now and requeen with a Varroa hygienic queen in the spring.
If the bees make it through in decent shape, I mean, wouldn't the queens that are not passing on Varroa resistant genetics, they'll probably die over the winter anyway, won't they?
They won't if the beekeeper has kept the mite counts down artificially by using treatments.
I see.
A lot of them will make it through the winter, but then the mites will come roaring back in the spring.
I see.
Yeah, that's sort of my assessment all summer long, up until about August, is if I don't think they could survive on their own in a forest, that queen goes. And I replace her with something I think could survive, or at least I re-roll the dice with something better.
Me too.
Well, is something better? I mean, is it especially?
Yeah, something that's come from a
bee?
line that's not needing treatments, or needing very minimal treatment. That they have traits that they're doing to control the Varroa on their own.
But other than buying from a supplier that's raising queens that has those characteristics, if you're raising your own bees locally through splits and so forth, I mean, can you raise resistant queens locally, or is it just not a winning strategy?
Well, I mean, you've got to have a lot of bees and a lot of colonies, and then your bees are going to go off and they're going to mate with everybody's queens that they brought up, you know, the drones from the queens that everybody bought from California. So several of us are banding together to try to get some better genetics throughout the city, and Jeff's leading the cause. So what I've done the last few years is I bought some Varroa hygienic queens, and I breed from the best and most mite resistant colonies the next year that also produce a lot of honey. So like I said, I monitored all my mites, all my colonies last month for mites, and I had everywhere on average from 1 mite to 5. And then I had this one colony that had 20. So that queen went down the road talking to herself that day.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got to get that colony healthy. That's why I treated them and waited for, broodless period to use oxalic acid because I still have my supers on. And so we're trying to make it move the needle here in Seattle, but it's an uphill battle.
I see.
So can you do it with 1 or 2 colonies? No, not really.
No, and you don't start with what a California breeder produced for you because we're not in their best interest. They're producing for the commercial guys that have a regimen for treating 3 to 4 times a year and replacing their queens at least twice a year.
Mm.
So it's we're just getting the byproduct of their work. So people like Lori Miller and other people, the smaller in the localized breeders, are doing more work to select that. So piggyback on what they've already done for you.
Mm-hmm.
Buy a queen from a local breeder that's been trying to do this.
And then breed your queens from
the raised daughters from that queen. If they were doing really well, yeah.
Okay.
If they don't, then roll the dice again and get a different queen from a different breeder.
Just out of curiosity, when you test for mites, you mentioned you test earlier this month, but do you test all during the summer to try to identify those queens earlier when you can actually breed and replace?
So I found that I don't have to because I've had the Varroa hygienic queens for years now, and I know that the mite counts don't get high in those colonies until this time of year, so I can get away with it. But I know that people that bought queens from California and from mass distributors, they had 20, 30 count in their alcohol washes in June and July. They can't get away with it. And I probably should have checked that swarm queen earlier, but I got busy and I didn't. And they already had, way too high of a mite count.
Mm.
Yeah, in my method for checking earlier season, it's kind of something similar to what Tracy's doing, but I'll rip open drone brood and I'll count drones to see, because I figure, they're the first ones that are going to get infected. So if I pull 20 drone cells out and I don't see a single mite, the hive's probably looking pretty good. So that's, while they're making drones all spring and early summer, I don't need to do alcohol washes if I'm doing that. Because you basically, your drones are your magnet for mites initially.
Yep. And I use drone frames in my colonies in June and July.
Right. Well, I do too. But I saw it wasn't until later, as the summer progresses that I start to see the mites more plentiful in the drone comb.
Right, because remember Randy's chart that
right.
The June is really the summer, end of June's the summer solstice, and so the bee population starts going down after that point, but the mite population keeps going up, and that's where Randy talks about that inflection point where the bee population gets low enough and the mite population keeps growing that you run into that danger point, and that's when the hive tips over, the colony tips over into the death zone.
Hmm. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Someone is asking about, they can't seem to contribute here, but paraphrasing, anaphylactic shock and a fear of it because of a severe reaction to a sting, and whether they should get rid of their hives or hang in there and see if the next reaction isn't awful. It's kind of the overriding question.
They should talk to their allergist.
I had that experience when I was brand new before I even had my own bees. Arm got huge went to the doctor. She said, get rid of your bees. I went to the allergist and he said, did you pass out or faint or anything? I said, no. He said, then you're fine. And it never happened again. I get stung all the time. Nothing.
Talk to your allergist. I'm not a doctor and I don't play one on TV.
Yeah, if you get stung on your finger and your throat swells up, that's serious. You know, don't gamble with your life. You know, because if you pass out next to your hive, you know, you only have minutes to potentially survive. So, you know, definitely talk to a doctor if you have any concerns. And you may want to get EpiPens are expensive, but you may want to get an EpiPen or a generic brand and just have that. I mean, I think every beekeeper should probably have one of those on hand just in case you have that bad reaction that one day.
It seems like, though, just swelling, a bad bee sting, doesn't mean that the next time it would be anaphylactic, unless you had sensitivity in your extremities and your mouth.
Yeah,
and
I mean, a sting is supposed to
chest.
make the localized area swell, not your throat, unless you got stung in your throat, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm guessing most people get stung on their fingers or their wrists or their hands somewhere. And as long as that's not making, I mean, yeah, every sting could be potentially dangerous. Yeah. You know, and if you look at what allergists do, you're getting a treatment weekly, I think. You know, they're giving you a little bit of venom all the time. So if you never get stung or get stung once a year, you have no idea if you're building resistance or sensitivity. One thing you can always do, and I always tell people this for lots of reasons, is don't work your bees tired or dehydrated. Be very hydrated when you're working your bees. It's just good. I mean, it's hot sometimes. You're in suits. Don't be dehydrated when you're out in your hives. Yeah, and talk to a doctor.
When I come in for a break between hives, I do some of that electrolyte tablet in a glass of water too, because it's not just water that you're losing. So that helps me feel better.
I drink beer. Just kidding.
I think that makes you dehydrated, actually.
No, it's Coors Light. That's hydration.
Oh.
Joking.
I'm sure you are.
A little.
Coors is not beer.
No,
Tracy.
it's hydration. Okay, on that happy note, I might go drink one.
I think you're muted, kid.
Yeah, you're on mute.
I see lips moving, but I hear nothing. I think she's delayed too.
Oh, mute.
There you go.
There I am. It's so backwards, the little word. Anyway, it seems like cheering with beer is a good ending to the meeting. We can all end on a happy note, and it's been a wonderful conversation.
Yes, very helpful.
Yes, thank you. Very
Thank you.
informative. Very good.
Okay, have fun. See you guys.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, puppy.